Welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable. Leonard Bellavia is the founding partner at Bellavia Blatt and has spent his life in the retail automotive industry and represents thousands of dealerships across the country. He is no stranger to the Fixed Ops community. Len Bellavia, welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Thank you, Ted. Always a pleasure to be with you. Appreciate it.
Len, I think there's no more timely topic right now than what you and I are going to discuss because it's been all over in the news. I see it and hear it everywhere. In fact, Len, a number of folks who have been on the roundtable off camera have said to me, hey, we're concerned about some of the discussions that are taking place in the industry. So I've got to ask you about that. Len, automakers are speeding now towards electrification, and some are even pledging full electric lineups, this decade or in the next decade. And they're more than hinting at a new distribution model for those electrified vehicles and perhaps taking the orders, pre-orders, if you will, online. Len, how is all this talk going to play out? And are dealers going to be at risk of being cut out of that sales process that they've been so key to for the last 100 years?
Well, Ted, the risk really is whether dealers are going to invoke their rights. I think the one common factor throughout all these discussions is that dealers have an arsenal of state franchise laws that have been on the books for decades that are designed to protect against this very subject, which is, the erosion of the dealer franchise model. And it's anyone's guess at this stage what direction it's going to go in, except that I think we're at a crossroads because OEMs are actually, articulating all of these different potential ways that the distribution system is going to look over the next 5 years or so. Some of them are pretty daunting because they chip away at some of the most important elements of the franchise model. Other manufacturers are not so fast to be talking about changing things because I think they see the value of the franchise system and having dealers in the marketplace and consumers dealing locally. So of course, manufacturers like Ford and Volkswagen and Audi and some of the other ones are a little more out there in terms of promoting these direct sales models or consumers dealing direct with manufacturers and dealers only being the delivery center. So there's different variations of all these topics. But I think the common denominator, which should make dealers feel a little more at ease, is that every state, all 50 states, have prohibitions in their state statutes that benefit dealers and protect them against a lot of these discussions about direct selling, trade-in prices being established by manufacturers, the agency model, which is a term that's being thrown out there quite a bit. It's probably worth a little discussion here. But these laws don't do a darn thing to benefit dealers unless dealers invoke their rights. So that's a whole other subject, because how do dealers really protect themselves? Because we all know no dealer wants to go to court. State dealer associations are the most effective way, in my opinion, to level the playing field. Dealer council is another example of how dealers can kind of negotiate a resolution that's fair to everybody. So we can talk theoretically. Theoretically, the manufacturers can't do anything that they're talking about. But in the real world, dealers don't sue manufacturers unless their entire existence is at stake. So I think the happy medium is to devise a way to negotiate with manufacturers so that some of the good points that they're putting forth, meaning an optimal customer experience, can be accomplished without taking away some of the dealer's key rights. And I talk more about, I'm not as concerned about direct selling, because I think that'll find its own level, meaning ultimately what drives manufacturers is the quest to maintain and increase their market share. So dealers aren't necessary to remind manufacturers that they need to preserve their market share. That will take care of itself. So if one manufacturer does something that either dealers or the buying public doesn't like, and they repel against it and wind up going to a competitor, well, the manufacturer will fix that internally. They don't need a lawsuit from a dealer to be told that they can't do it and it's a bad idea. But on the other end of the extreme is that we know in a few weeks, I think Ford is going to be holding a national meeting with all of their dealers in Las Vegas and providing a little more clarity as to what all this chatter is about with respect to direct selling. And that's the time that dealers will need to be prepared to either embrace it if it makes sense or fight back against it and put a stop to it, because the dealers have the right. And it all comes from the provisions in the state franchise law that say if you're a legacy manufacturer and you have a national footprint of franchise dealers, well, you can't just eviscerate that network. The dealers have the right to do the selling and the manufacturers have the right to do the manufacturing, and never the twain shall meet. But using the simple example of direct selling, well, that is a violation of most state franchise laws. To the extent that any of these activities constitute the selling of a new motor vehicle, well, manufacturers are prohibited from doing that. So ultimately, dealers have the leverage here because they could, again, this is a theoretical comment, they could go to court, get an injunction, and prevent Ford, in my example, from dealing direct with consumers. So that is an important tool, not so much to go and get that injunction, but to remind Ford that whatever they're going to put out there as a change in the franchise structure should be fair to all parties. Because if it's too one-sided, well, the dealers are not going to be bashful, because now you're tinkering with their financial net worth, right? So if you're going to take away all the blue sky value, because in that case, no one's going to want to buy your dealership if all of the profit goes upstream to the manufacturer, then dealers are going to become very motivated to invoke their rights.
Len, as my memory serves me correctly, every so many years, it seems, some of the OEMs have tested the dealers on this very subject. They've done it in different ways, but again, it still comes back to the dealers being resolute. Do you think this time it's all about copying that Tesla model? And is that really a smart thing for the OEMs to do?
Well, it's a little bit of apples and watermelons, right? I mean, it sounds very simple to say, well, we want to replicate the Tesla model because it seems to be working. Well, when you dig down deeper, it's really not working perfectly, because if you read a lot of these articles that are out there, consumer satisfaction with Tesla has been waning over the past 3 years. It's actually gone down on several fronts. And to read those surveys is really instructive. And every OEM should pay very close attention to it, because in the end, consumers want service. They want service, they want convenience, they want it to happen quickly and at very little cost and inconvenience to them. Tesla has not really been at the forefront of accomplishing all of those goals because they don't have a footprint in most of the major markets that they service. I think the OEMs recognize that, so I doubt that they're going to be too quick to emulate the Tesla model to its extreme. So maybe what we're going to hear in Vegas and elsewhere at these OEM announcements is that they want to replicate Tesla to a degree on the sales side, but keep the dealer invested on the service side. Now that can't happen though if dealers aren't making a fair gross on the front end. So that raises the specter of what's the agency model. The agency model really is something that pertains more to European dealers, because European dealers don't have state franchise laws like American dealers do. But conceptually, I argue to my clients when they call me and they talk about what's going to happen if the manufacturers go down this road of an agency model. Again, another theoretical response. If the manufacturer is willing to pay the dealer a fair front end gross profit on the sale of a vehicle, if the dealer is only acting as an agent to deliver the vehicle, so what? So we'll take the money and maybe not have to keep on as many staffing, managers, sales managers, because if there's nothing to sell and the manufacturer is doing all the selling and where the dealer is just delivering, but still getting their fair gross profit, that's not a terrible situation. So that's why I advise dealers to sit back and wait and hear what the blueprint, see it, what it looks like before they push back on it. My concern is manufacturers are not historically very generous. To your point, Ted, we've seen this in the past, with the Ford, direct selling model back in the, was it the 90s, where they thought they could play a dominant role in retailing and set these experiments up in upstate New York and one place out west, and that failed miserably. Then manufacturers decided that what consumers really wanted was no haggling, one price selling, right? That was the whole Saturn model.
That's right. That's right.
Well, guess what? Consumers, no matter how much you tell them this is a no haggle experience, they still want to haggle. So a lot of what we hear about consumers and what they want and their preferences represents only a small percentage of what's really going on, on the showroom floor. So some of this is esoteric conversation, but dealers really need to be the voice of what consumers want, not the OEM. So following the Tesla model is somewhat of a fool's errand, because Tesla had the luxury of not having to abide by franchise laws because they never had a dealer network. So trying to follow the Tesla model is kind of a fool's play, because it's not apples to apples. Auto manufacturers that have legacy, dealer networks have to follow the law, and for good reason, because it's in the best interest of the consumers. Keep in mind, these franchise laws, of course, to the manufacturer, they view it as, well, these are just designed to benefit the dealers. No, that's not true. The public policy behind state franchise laws is to provide integrity in the life experience of a consumer in owning a vehicle. They need to be able to have convenience with respect to the sales, and have a permanent structure in place so that when they have service needs or recall needs, they can be accomplished locally. And of course, the state legislatures and the state economies are very dependent on franchise dealers because of the state sales tax revenues, the real property tax, the income tax revenues that the states enjoy, and the increased number of people that are employed by virtue of the franchise system. So it's not all about the dealers. The manufacturers have to appreciate that while they talk about enhancing the customer experience, that has been done decades ago when these laws were put into place, because the entire customer experience is predicated upon convenience, proximity, and the expertise of technicians not far from each consumer's home to attend to these problems. So some of this is just a lot of rhetoric. I think dealers see through it. Even if you look at this, the visceral definition of an enhanced customer experience, how is that being furthered when you have so many different models of let's say, a Ford F-150 or a Chevy Silverado? When you go online and try and figure out how to order one of these, there are 6 different iterations of each one of these models. So it's really not practical to think that a customer can navigate through ordering a vehicle online to order, unless the process is totally reinvented. And there's no indication that that's the way consumers want to buy their F-150. No one wants cookie cutter vehicles all the way down the line. So what sounds good in the drawing board necessarily is not the way it'll play out. So some of these things, I think, have to be taken head on by dealers and fight back through their dealer associations, their dealer council, or even their attorneys. And other things, I think, will take care of themselves, because, as you pointed out, some of these great ideas of the past weren't so great. So they'll have to, trip over themselves and regroup, and then go back to the drawing board. What I worry about is, what financial problems dealers will suffer in the interim while manufacturers are stumbling over themselves with these half-baked ideas about what's best for the consumer.
And Len, you do a great job of reminding us all why that dealer franchise, that local dealer, is so important, with little things which are really big things, such as the term we learned 2 years ago, essential business, and why that local dealer is so important to the community to be able to repair vehicles and to be able to offer that. And as you just mentioned, things such as the state sales tax revenues as well. There's a lot at play here, Len, and we're going to be keeping a close eye on it. And finally, you've mentioned dealer councils, state associations. Is there anything else dealers should be doing right now as they watch all this play out?
Yeah, I think they should be communicating more regularly with their state associations. And I will tell you that the ATAEs that run these associations are really on the cutting edge. I mean, they have their ear to the ground. They know what's going on. They meet regularly with each other, with NADA, with their dealer boards. So no grass is growing under their feet. So they don't need me to remind them. I mean, they're already ahead of the curve. But I think dealers really need to engage them. I mean, they're paying dues. It's not just about golf outings. It's now that the rubber really meets the road now, because this is a very critical time. I think we're at a juncture where the voice of every dealer needs to be heard, so that ATAEs can understand not just the generic discussions, but franchise specific information, because even the ATEs must rely on their dealers to know what's going on at each manufacturer. So if you're a Buick dealer or a Mitsubishi dealer, and you know of a program that you think runs afoul of state franchise protections, it's important to bring that to the attention of the ATAEs, because I know that the dealer associations that I represent are pretty proactive at getting letters written to manufacturers outlining, because not all of these programs are based on malevolence from the manufacturer. Sometimes they just don't know the provisions of a state franchise law. There are 50 state franchise laws. So when a policy is issued on a national basis, oftentimes they don't check off the box of each state franchise law to make sure it's compliant. So it's really an obligation of the state state dealer associations to let the manufacturers know what aspects of their programs don't comply with the state law. It's not necessarily an adversarial exchange. It's more information gathering and sharing. It doesn't have to be contentious, but oftentimes that's a way to seek relief from that part of a program that violates the franchise protections in any particular state. So the message really to dealers is to share your knowledge, because don't assume that your ATAE is aware of the nuances of a particular program that was just announced.
Len, thank you so much. We're going to continue to keep a close eye on it. I know you will as well. And we hope you come back and share some updates, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot playing out here in the near and short term. So Len Bellavia, everybody, who's the founding partner at Bellavia Blatt, DealerLaw.com, the dealer advocate. Len, on behalf of the Fixed Ops community, thanks so much for your time today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Ted. Thank you so much.